Okay, hi everybody. Thank you everybody for the. Actually, I've got some real good ideas actually from what everybody is suggesting about what they use maple syrup for, and I'm actually going to try some of those things. I will say, I personally think that all of those things are the correct answer, but the other correct answer is that maple syrup could also be just taken straight up. I'm not a real Scotch connoisseur, but I understand you don't mix Scotch with anything other than Scotch. And I think the same thing probably could also apply to maple syrup. So this is actually the first bottle of maple syrup I've made this year. And it's interesting because this is the first run of sap in the year is lighter and it's more of a delicate taste. And it's called the Robin Run. And I've never actually made a robin run before because I don't do very much. It's just a hobby. And by the time I collect enough sap, it's usually several runs in before I can actually make any maple syrup at all. But this year I did venture out and I did the robin run. I boiled probably about 30 or so liters of sap, which is not very much, and produced a whopping 2 small bottles of maple syrup. So, but I have to say it really tastes fantastic. I mean, it's probably the best tasting syrup I've ever tasted. It's very mapley, but it's still, one of the things about maple syrup that I find is so interesting is that it's a fairly subtle flavor. The sweetness is obviously very in your face, but the mapleness of it tends to be very subtle. This is a little bit more mapley than I've seen before. So anyway, I wanted to talk today a little bit about the Richmond Hill Ward 4 Maple Syrup Festival, and thank you, Marge, for the opportunity to promote this. Just a little background, this all started a number of years ago when, I used to, when I was first on council, I started having a barbecue in the summer, and barbecues are fun and all that stuff, but I really was looking for a festival that I could put on that would bring people together and add some additional value to the community. And so I thought, a maple syrup festival is something that we didn't have in Richmond Hill at the time. It would bring people together for a real, unique and interesting experience. And I think it's been a huge hit over the last 4 years that we've had it. Last year, unfortunately, it was the first event to get canceled in the pandemic. The cancellation happened on this day, I believe, last year, and the Maple Syrup Festival was scheduled for about 3 or 4 days after that, so it ended up getting canceled. But this year, we're still not able to get together live and in person, but we are, I still believe it's important for us to get together and celebrate spring and maple syrup. And so we're going to have a kind of a virtual version of it this year. So for the webinar itself will take place on the 21st from 10 until 12. There'll be all kinds of fun activities in the webinar itself. We have an Indigenous elder Wabagoon, who's going to be speaking to us. I'm really looking forward to hearing her talk. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I made the maple syrup this year so early was I promised her a bottle. So I wanted to make sure that I made good on my promise on that. But there is a bunch of activities right now on my website, there's a whole bunch of things that kids can do and families, and there are some prizes involved too. So hopefully you can, go in and enjoy that. So the website is davidwest-richmondhill.ca. And if you go there to the events section, you can sign up for the maple syrup. You do have to register for the webinar, and I certainly we hope you can join us in partnership with the Richmond Hill Historical Society. And we've been really lucky this year to have had a lot of support from the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. They're going to be doing a lot of the programming and including a maple syrup cooking demonstration for any of you that are interested in learning how to use maple syrup in some of the recipes. So one of the things about creating this festival is it was always maple syrup has been something that I've really loved throughout my whole life. And I don't know that you can see this well, but this was me when I was about 10 years old. And it was the front page of the the York Region Media Group paper in Maple, where I grew up. And I got to tell you, this is me sticking my tongue out and letting the sap drip into my mouth. And I took a lot of ribbing from my friends at school over that. And, you know, maybe it was a little embarrassing as a 10-year-old being on the front page of the Liberal, but this was taken at the Maple Pancake Festival. And every year when I grew up, my dad would give the tours of the sugar bush. And I got to go and hang out with him all day long in the sugar bush. And it was Mr. Robson's sugar bush. And I remember Mr. Robson was an interesting guy, kind of an older guy in our community. And he had one hand and the other hand was a hook. And he used to, you know, tease all the little kids and, you know, tickle them with his hook. It was quite fun. But he owned the sugar bush, and we always spent the day in his sugar bush. And all the people from the Pancake Festival would come and you know, spend the day in the sugar bush and see how maple syrup was made. And that's kind of maybe what got me addicted to the whole maple syrup thing when I was quite young. However, I should say that our family has made maple syrup now for generations. My family, or my dad's family, grew up and located in Northern Ontario. And this photo is actually my great-grandfather, my grandfather's brother and his sister, and then the little guy at the very end of that lineup is my grandfather. And so they've been making maple syrup forever. I remember interviewing my grandfather once for a school project when I was in about grade 5, and I'll never forget him saying that you know, maple syrup actually helped him and his family get through the Depression. You know, they weren't going to starve to death because they lived on a farm, but there was no cash. And the only thing that they really could sell was maple syrup. And there was some American tourists that would always come to that area in the summer, and they would always buy the maple syrup. And if I'm not mistaken, it was $5 a gallon at that time, which is considerably less than it is now. So there's another photo. This is the little guy on the left is my grandfather, and my great uncle and my great aunt. My great grandfather was a photographer of sorts, and I'm quite certain that those three would not be dressed up like that working in the sugar bush. So this was obviously a set up photo. But I thought that was kind of an interesting backstory I wish I could have asked my great-grandfather about. So that's the maple sugar bush. And I should say that this photo was taken quite a bit later than that last photo, because the gentleman on the bottom left, the shorter one, I guess he's sitting down, that's my grandfather. And now he's an adult in this photo. So that was the West family sugar bush. They, of course, you know, maple syrup season isn't just about this time of year, because, you know, there's a lot of work to be done in the sugar bush throughout the year, you know, cutting wood, because at that time, you know, they cut wood to make the heat to boil the syrup. And so all of those pieces of wood on the left side are wood that have been cut the season before in preparation for the maple syrup season. So this is actually, fast forward to today. This is a part of my rig, and we tap about 23 maple trees. I joke with my family that I actually know them all personally, because we just don't have that many. And it's just a fun thing. It's when we started this when my son was little, and he's, you know, he's still involved with us today. And, you know, we don't make very much. And I, you know, after buying all the propane that we use to fire the evaporator and buying the equipment itself, you know, it certainly, you know, probably costs us $150 per gallon of, you know, for maple syrup, but it's fun and it's a family tradition. And it really has become for me, you know, the thing I look forward to in the spring. It to me, maple syrup season is the first sign of spring, because it really starts before the snow really starts to melt. And, you know, when the sap starts running, you know, the green grass that we're going to start to see is soon to follow. So there's my son. This was our first setup. Essentially, it's actually not that hard to get set up for maple syrup if you're interested. This is a propane burner that you can see on the bottom. That's one of those like, it's about a 16 by 16 inch burner. It's a single burner. We started out just putting a pot on the top, and you put the sap in, and it's 40 liters of sap for every liter of syrup. So you need an unbelievable amount of sap, and it takes forever to boil this down. And you boil and boil and boil and boil and boil. And then finally, toward the end of it, when it's getting very close to syrup, because above the boiling point of water is when syrup is ready. If you boil it too long, the sugar crystals will crystallize in the jar, and that's not good. If you boil it too little, it'll be too runny, and it has to be like there's a hairline when it's ready. And the other problem about maple syrup, and this is a warning for anybody that's ever going to do this in their kitchen, when it gets close to being syrup, there is a moment where it'll start to boil up and boil over. And if you've ever had syrup boil over on your stove, it is not easy to clean it up. So I would highly recommend you don't do that. So there's a part of the sugar bush that we have now. And this is actually I splurged a few years ago and bought an actual evaporator. And so that's the setup that we have now. Again, it takes a really long time to get down to the actual syrup, but if you're obsessed with making maple syrup like I am, I guess it's worth the trouble. And then that's the finished result. And I should tell you, further to my comment at the beginning about drinking it straight, I think that all started because when you're bottling maple syrup in small quantities like we are, we usually put it in small bottles, and at the very end, after you're finished all of the small bottles, there's always a teeny weeny little bit left at the end. It's not enough for a meal, but it's not really, God forbid you wouldn't want to throw it away. So we usually just put it in a little shot glass and have a little taste at the end, and that's kind of the tradition at the end of the process. So this is a photo from 2 years ago at the Maple Syrup Festival in Richmond Hill. So we actually did tap a couple of trees in the Twickenham forest. There's absolutely beautiful trees in there. And so we had all kinds of people show up. Over the years, the festival has really grown in popularity. We had probably in the neighborhood of 1,000 people show up 2 years ago, not last year, as I said, because it was canceled. But I bring my evaporator, and we boil some of the sap. And we also have a couple of trees that are tapped. I have to tell you, one of the things that is so amazing is to see people who have never seen this process before, watching this liquid coming out of a tree. And then, we often will provide little taste samples of, the finished syrup. And it really is amazing to people. Amazing to me to see, the people's look about how miraculous this whole process is, that this liquid comes out of a tree and turns into something so delicious. And I think that's part of the allure of this whole process for me. I'm still amazed at the miracle of it all. So here's some smiling faces. There's nothing like sugaring kids up and getting them to smile. I'm sure anybody has children, that. We've also had horse and buggy rides to the sugar bush for the last few years, which is also another kind of fun activity. As I mentioned earlier, horses in the early days of maple sugar and maple sugaring were a big part, because there was a lot of heavy lifting and pulling and so on, and a lot of the farmers that would have done that would have certainly relied on horses and horsepower to be able to do it. And there is Grandma Maple, as Marge suggested. This is actually not Marge, but I know Marge was Grandma Maple for us at the Maple Syrup Festival a couple of years. And we also, at the Maple Syrup Festival, we have a demonstration of the old style of making maple syrup, which is basically having a big fire with a pot hanging over the fire and letting it boil. Those that are connoisseurs of maple syrup will also say that, when you do it in that way, the maple syrup has just a slightly smoky flavor to it too, which is also an interesting take on it. So anyway, so that's basically it for my talk. Again, I certainly hope you can join us on the 21st. The webinar I think is going to be really interesting, and I will admit that I'm very much missing people, being able to be there in person and enjoy pancakes together as a community and do all the different activities that we offered and all that stuff. And I'm hoping that we can get back to that next year. I certainly am committed to that. But I will admit, like COVID, has done in so many aspects of our lives, there's so many things that we probably never would have explored, but because we had to, we were kind of forced to do something different. And I think this year's Maple Syrup Festival and the webinar is a real opportunity for us to do something different that, is related to all the things that we've done in the past. So as I said, at the bottom line, as a counselor in Richmond Hill, it's fun to put on a party and all that stuff. And I really believe it is. But I always think that it's also really important, to bring something to the community. And I think that, maple syrup is something that we can and do celebrate as a community, as Canadians. I hope that it'll be something that is still something that the community will come together, at least, apart, but together to celebrate on the 21st of March. So